You went from starting a business in your basement to selling it for $64 million.
I did.
How'd you do that?
Well, one step at a time.
Yeah.
It was, not easy at first. It took me a while to learn how to sell shrink wrap software. I mean, it took me about 3 years, but once I did, it was off to the races.
Well, you taught yourself how to do coding and all, right?
I did. Yeah, with my real job, I was at Redwood City, California, and I had a big delay to catch the flight. I was going back to Baltimore, and so I went to the Stanford campus and I bought a book on programming in a basic computer language. I read that during the layover, wrote my first computer program or two on the flight back, and it just so happened back in 1975, we were owned by a company called Control Data, one of the first computer companies, and there was a dumb terminal in my office that ran the basic computer language. So that's how I learned how to do it.
I mean, you read it during the layover.
I did, yeah.
How'd you stay awake? Computer coding books are hard to read. That's not easy to do.
Well, at the time, DrPhil, I found it pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And it really charged me up and kept me going. And part of that was PTSD. I like to bury myself in things, and the PTSD kept me going.
Because you escape from some of that when you really dig into something, right? You lose yourself into content, yeah. Now, you write in your book, Fire in the Hole, about the biggest lesson you learned. And I actually had an excerpt pulled up of it. All you have in this world is your word. That's your value. If you establish a reputation for keeping your promises and for being as solid as your handshake, it will always serve you well. To this day, everything I do in business starts from these lessons. I still live by them, even now. Knowing you, I can attest that's how you are, and that is your reputation. Where did that come from?
It is just something that, I did over the years. My father was somebody, he wasn't much of a businessman, but he always kept his word. He told me that's something you need to place a lot of value on, and I did. And in the Marine Corps, they reinforced it. I've never changed that. And, I will bid on deals, always with a fair price, but I will have people, other businessmen, give me the deal over somebody that maybe bids more money or better terms, because they know I'll do exactly what I say I'll do.
Mm-hmm. And you've made some deals, because you started GoDaddy and you sold the majority stake, not all of it, but the majority stake in it in 2011 for $2.3 billion.
I did.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, that's a stack of cash.
Yeah. I'll take your word for that. That was the biggest deal you'd made at that point, right?
Absolutely.
What was your thinking when you walked away from making that deal?
You always wonder if you did the right deal, right? But, I think I just smiled and I was thinking, well done, Bobby. I got to tell you, you show me a successful business person, and I'll show you somebody that has failed time and time again, because that's how we learn.
That's right. Yeah, but you stay with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I always said the difference between winners and losers is winners do things losers don't want to do, and one of those things is you do it until. You don't do it for a month, you don't do it for a year, you do it until you get where you're going. You do it until you get it right. And I think that was pretty right.
Yeah, and there's also one more thing, is winners are doing it for the right reason. I mean, they're building their business to make a difference, to deliver something nobody else is doing. And it could be at a price nobody else is doing, or at a product or a way of delivering it. But that's the number one thing that's driving them. What they're not doing it for is to make a buck.
Yeah. You got to be passionate about what you're doing. You discovered, in really looking into your life and your history, that your childhood had as bigger impact on you even than the trauma from Vietnam.
Yeah, like so many of us, DrPhil, I grew up tough. My mother, for the most part, and I loved her dearly, wouldn't have traded her for anybody. She had a number of untreated nervous breakdowns when I was a child. My mom and dad were gamblers, so we were less than broke. It just was hard. My mother used to lay into me. I had a bedroom in the basement. She'd call me upstairs, and I'd stand there in my little jockey shorts. I guess I was about 8 years old, and she'd say, "Where's your father?" And I'd say, "Mom, I don't know." And then she'd go, "Where's your father?" I said, "Mom, I don't know." And she'd literally just scream it. And then she would take her head and start pounding it into the wall. She'd start pulling her hair out in clumps. She'd make a noise like a wounded animal. And and this happened again and again and again. And I would just fade back into my bedroom.
Yeah, and when this was happening, did you know this wasn't normal?
Yeah, I knew it was wrong. I used to lay in bed and wonder why that happened to Mom. Why all those terrible things were happening. And I was never afraid, but I was ashamed. And it's just hard. It's just hard for me to understand.
Yeah, of course. And we're talking about Bob's book, Fire in the Hole, and I've spent most of my life studying success. I've studied champions in every walk of life, and they've all had to overcome many things. And it's why I've described this book as a page turner. I just absolutely couldn't put it down. There's wisdom in these pages. And in this book, he writes in one passage, "In many ways, I grew up to be like my dad, and in many ways, thankfully, I didn't. Despite everything, I always had a lot of respect for my father. He had his faults, but he was my dad and I loved him. As lacking as both of my parents were, I still loved them." Was there a point that you had to forgive them for the things that they visited on your life?
Of course I did. And, I always loved them, but as I grew up, I was a little resentful. I always kept that under my vest. And then as I got older and I understood why they were the way they were, then, I couldn't hold them accountable for that. They were victims.
Right. So there's a generational legacy. And you say your dad drank too much, he gambled, had affairs, was rarely home. Maybe that was modeled for him. But the problem is the kids pick up the tab for that. They pay the price for that, and it took its toll on you.
Did. Yeah, it was just about as difficult as could be. It, I guess, made me an introvert. Always kept my problems to myself. Mm-hmm. And I always had followed in business where I've learned to keep my own counsel. If I have a decision to make, I keep it to myself.
Right. And you got to the 5th grade, and the way you describe it in the book, you said there was the 5th grade ceremony where they called everybody up, and they just didn't call you up.
Yeah, it was me and 2 other knuckleheads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how you found out you're not passing the 5th grade. And you said you went out a window and took off running because you didn't want to tell your parents that you'd failed the 5th grade.
Yeah, that's correct. I ran my heart out. My father was holding my brother's report card, and he says to me, "Where's your report card?" And that's when I told a fib. I said, "This is the best I could come up with, Dr. Phil." I said, "This year, if you passed, you didn't get a report card." And he goes, "Let me get this straight." He goes, "If you passed, you didn't get a report card." And as serious as I could be, I said, "That's right, Dad." And he's holding my brother's report card. and so he looks at me like he heard a dog that heard a strange sound. And then finally he said, "All right, get in the car." And off we went.
You didn't get caught.
No, I didn't get caught. I was on death row all summer.
Yeah.
And I just knew if they found out, be hell to pay. And they never did find out, because on the first day of school, I went and got in line with the 6th graders, right? And Frankie and Anthony, the other 2 guys that failed along with me, they're still in the 5th grade line. and they're waving me over, and I'm going, no, no. And I'm looking away. And finally, you know, the bell rings. So I walk in, and the nun for the sixth grade that year was Sister St. Thomas, pulls me out of line, and she said, Sister Brenda told me what you did. She told me that you failed, but you didn't wait around for her to come back and fail you. You ran out and put yourself up. She didn't know what to do. Then she said those 4 words, so she passed you.
I love it. All right.